So we've completed our tests. We've got our watercolor techniques practiced. You're in good shape. I've removed my watercolors from the equation. I've grabbed a pencil. And what we're going to do right now is you're going to practice creating a landscape. We're going to add 3 layers to this. You want your foreground, closest to the bottom of your page, your middle ground, those details that are connecting in between, and a background, something like a sky or something in the distance. The challenge as an artist working with a landscape is add details throughout each that make you want to go through that space. So some tips and tricks as you're working on this landscape. More details closer to you. You can see better details the closer those objects are to you. So a tree that's in front of you, you may see the bark and the needles. As it goes to the middle ground, it might become blobs. As it moves to the background, it might get hazy. Atmospheric perspective, things get lighter as they go back farther. They also get bluer. So that's one of the tricks artists can use. If you look out the window, objects that are super far away, they're going to get lighter in value. They're going to rise up the paper and they're going to become less detailed. Now for this exercise, you can keep it so your landscape is nice and vertical, or if you want, you can turn your paper over and sketch it. For this, I am looking for a foreground, a middle ground, and a background, and some values added in with the watercolors. So right now what I want you to do is just kind of think about your paper as 3 layers, add in some details. This could be a cityscape, a landscape, any type of space that's going to have details in that foreground, middle ground, and background. So take a moment, sketch that out, and then we're going to talk about what to do as we finish up. So I've wrapped up my sketch here of my landscape. I've chosen to go vertical, but again, you can go horizontal if you need by rotating your paper. If you're having a hard time coming up with a location, it's very important to think about places that you want to visit. Think about places that you like to go to on the weekends, places you've been on vacation, places you'd love to travel to. And then look up images. I really like being near the woods and the mountain. I like sunrises and sunsets, so I thought about incorporating those. I am challenging you to include a foreground, so I use trees here, a middle ground, and a background. And I've outlined this in pencil. And what we're going to do as you finish up is you're going to be able to go in and combine some ink drawing with this. This is a good chance to practice. Notice I've kept everything pretty loose though. You don't need to refine everything perfectly at this point. You can keep it pretty simplified and just experimenting. A couple techniques I use to create the space other than just the placement and kind of front, middle, and back. I've done overlapping, so certain things that are in front, like the edge of this mountain or this cloud, are overlapping things that are behind it. That's especially true with the sun. So you can use overlapping. As things rise on the page, they are going to go further back. That's just something that we're aware of. That's a little visual cue that we have. Doing a lot of overlapping on this. I'm kind of keeping my lines loose, but this is a good chance now to go in and to practice what you've been working on with different ink techniques. So I might add some hatching in for this bark. And you can keep it pretty loose. This is just a study to get us comfortable with landscapes as you prepare for your final project. So I'm just going to go in, I'm going to trace my lines, I'm going to kind of set up some examples. You can use your hatching, your cross hatching, your stippling, and your scribble. And then we're going to add some watercolor to this. Now inked my landscape. I've tried to use denser areas by using hatching and scribbling and stippling to make these trunks a little bit darker, and they get lighter and thinner as they go back. I just kept it real general, and now before you start adding the watercolor, you can erase your lines. Now, you do not need to leave the pencil in there. You don't need to even be super specific with the ink. The ink is just there to give you some outlines to work with. This drawing and this painting process, it's going to kind of go back and forth. It's just there to kind of help you guide. So I've set up kind of this basic landscape, and now I'm going to start blocking in my colors and working kind of loosely as I add it. I'm just going to try to keep in mind that atmospheric perspective concept, that things are going to get lighter as they get further back. And the beautiful thing about watercolor is that it can be layered, that it's a transparent or translucent medium, meaning we can see through it. So if I put a green down and I put yellow over top of it, it's going to make a yellow-green. If I put a blue down and put a yellow over top of it, those two colors are going to mix together and make green. And we call that glazing. And that's the kind of strategy that's happening here. There's some red paint down, and I've gone over and I've put the blue over, and it makes it more purple. I put yellow over, it makes it orange. I put green over, and green and red are opposites, so it makes it kind of browner or duller. So really, to enhance your painting, you want to experiment with layering the colors. You can do blotches. We call that scumbling, using the paintbrush kind of in this flat realm to add little puffs. That's really good for grass and for the kind of foliage and the leaves. You can use saran wrap, which is just taking a piece of saran wrap over wet watercolor, moving it around, and it'll create this speckled effect. It's really good for doing water. You can add salt, which creates kind of like a snow or a crystal-like effect. Drops of rubbing alcohol and a Q-tip or any acetone, that will make the watercolor split out. One of my favorite techniques when I was younger was putting down a waxy crayon and painting over it. You can go in with a dry paper towel and pull up areas, and you can take your brush and hit the side of it and splatter some of the paint. So you can practice layering colors. You can put other colors over top of them once they're dry. Experiment. This is your place to practice. So create a landscape, foreground, middle ground, background, ink it up, and then we're going to add some color. So I'm going to add some color and experiment with some techniques on this painting. So I've started to add color, and you may be thinking, why is he using blues and purples? I'm trying to create this foggy effect, and I'm going to layer greens on top of this, and actually some darker purples for the trunk, maybe a little bit of brown. But I goofed. I got some watercolor where I didn't want it. So here's a couple strategies you can use. It's really important to take a clean brush, and then you can add in some water over top. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to try to water this down. And you'll notice already it's getting lighter. Watercolor will stain, but you can get the big areas of that out by adding a lot of water and then putting a paper towel over top of it and soaking it up. So this is similar to what we call the paper towel lift effect. If you layer a color down and want to remove it to show a color underneath, just put a lot of water over top of it and then lift it out. So this can help clean it, especially on things like my clouds up here where I goofed. I wanted to keep these mostly the white of the paper. We don't have white watercolor, so you have to work around white areas. But again, just add some water to it. The sooner you can do this to when you applied it, the better. If it's been sitting there for a day or so, it's going to be harder, and you can pull some of those out. So now I'm just going to go in and I'm going to start building up some of my layers. I want to make these trees like fall trees, so I might just start kind of tapping in some colors. Again, watercolor is a material that works well with layers, so think about it as 2 to 3 layers. Practice experimenting, putting different techniques, wet on dry, onto your different areas, and then add different layers to the top of it. So now I've got my first pass of color, and right now I'm actually going in with a dry brush. And this is where you can add textures. So you've kind of got everything blocked in. You can start to see some depth being created here. I might do 2 or 3 more layers on this, but just with the green, I've got a dry brush. I'm just kind of going in and I'm adding some texture. I'm making it so it's not just all blotchy. I'm using some of these techniques. And I'm going to layer some colors. So if I want to make it darker, I'm going to use things like purples or the opposite color, green and red. I might use some browns. I would suggest staying away from using blacks. Blacks tend to flatten things and kind of really change the appearance, but go in, experiment, move some paint around, spray it down, use some dry brushing, use some wet on wet, use some layering. Really experiment with the way that you can apply the watercolor, and it'll take some time, and that's okay, but I think you'll be really impressed with what you're able to get out of this whenever you try a few different techniques. Really breaking that up into smaller areas of different colors can really have a dramatic effect. And once you're done, if you want, you can go back over, you can layer some ink over it if you want to bring some of the lines out. That's the beauty of using ink and watercolor together. So I'm just kind of creating some gaps here. Might go in, and I'm actually going to add a little bit of purple dry brush into some areas. Ooh, too dark. So you got to be willing to adjust. Mistakes happen. As Bob Ross says, happy little accidents, but you can do some areas with some darker colors. You can add some shadows in. any of those things will really help. So just kind of move some paint around, experiment with it, see what happens, scrub some of that paint in there if you need. Try to have some fun with it. This is an experiment. I just want you to try some new things. So give it your best and take a photo of both halves and turn it on canvas whenever you're done.